Mr. Nobody by Anonymous. I know a funny little man as quiet as a mouse, who does the mischief that is done in everybody's house. There's no one ever sees his face, and yet we all agree that every plate we break was cracked by Mr. Nobody. 'Tis he who always tears out books, who leaves the door ajar. He pulls the buttons from our shirts and scatters pins afar. That squeaking door will always squeak, for prithee, don't you see? We leave the oiling to be done by Mr. Nobody. He puts damp wood upon the fire that kettles cannot boil. His are the feet that bring in mud and all the carpets soil. The papers always are mislaid, but who had them last but he? There's no one tosses them about but Mr. Nobody. The finger marks upon the door by none of us are made. We never leave the blinds unclosed to let the curtains fade. The ink we never spill, the boots that lying around you see are not our boots, they all belong to Mr. Nobody. Okay, this is an anonymous poem. It was written by an anonymous person. I would say this is was probably written about 1900, but that's my guess. It's most commonly read from a book that was an anthology of poetry published in 1947. So what is the theme of Mr. Nobody? Well, the theme is avoiding responsibility, is taking responsibility for your actions, and this is something that the poem is trying to say that children dislike taking responsibility, but I think adults dislike taking responsibility just as much as children. So I don't think that there's any difference really between the two. Let's see, in this we have Mr. Nobody, who is a scapegoat. He's the person for everybody to blame. Every time anything goes wrong, then it's Mr. Nobody's fault. And Mr. Nobody's this imaginary person who lives in everybody's house, who is the person who's responsible for all of the things that go wrong. So, Mr. Nobody. I know a funny little man as quiet as a mouse, who does the mischief that is done in everybody's house. So Mr. Nobody is the scapegoat. He's the scapegoat for everybody's problems. He's the person who gets everything wrong. There's no one ever sees his face, and yet we all agree that every plate we break was cracked by Mr. Nobody. So nobody can ever see him. Yeah, nobody's ever seen him. But we all agree on the same point, that every time we break a plate, yeah, it was Mr. Nobody who had cracked it, and that's why it broke. So it was Mr. Nobody's fault. Yeah, Mr. Nobody, he's the person responsible for everything. 'Tis he who always tears out books, who leaves the door ajar. So I think it's Mr. Nobody who tears pages out of books and doesn't shut the doors properly. I think this to me reminds me of a nurse or complaining to the children, or the housekeeper complaining to the children. Don't leave the doors ajar. Yeah, don't who tore this page out of the book? Nobody. He pulls the buttons from our shirts and scatters pins afar. So if there's a button missing from our shirt, then it's Mr. Nobody who pulled it off. And if you see a pin lying on the floor somewhere, it's Mr. Nobody who scattered it, who threw it there. That squeaking door will always squeak, for prithee don't you see? So that door that squeaks, it will always squeak, for prithee, pray thee, please, for please don't you see? We leave the oiling to be done by Mr. Nobody. So we leave the oiling of the door to be done by Mr. Nobody. So nobody ever oils it, because Mr. Nobody doesn't do it, because he's responsible for it. And then the door will always squeak. He puts damp wood upon the fire that kettles cannot boil. So if you put damp wood on the fire doesn't burn. The fire burns really badly. And if the fire's burning really badly, then the kettle won't boil. But that's Mr. Nobody's fault. His are the feet that bring in mud and all the carpets soil. Notice here, to soil, to make dirty, and they soil all the carpets. And he's the person who walks mud all over the carpets. Who walked mud all over these carpets? Nobody. The papers always are mislaid. Who had them last but he? So when somebody can't find the paper they need. So who was the last person to have it? Mr. Nobody. There's no one tosses them about but Mr. Nobody. So there's nobody who... The only person who moves the papers around is Mr. Nobody. The finger marks upon the door by none of us are made. Dirty fingers. We never leave the blinds unclosed to let the curtains fade. So... we always shut the blinds. We never unclose the blinds, because otherwise the sun makes the curtains fade. The ink we never spill. So we never spill ink. The boots that you see, that lying round you see, are not our boots. So if there are boots everywhere, then these aren't our boots. No. This all belongs to Mr. Nobody. It's Mr. Nobody's fault. So it's all Mr. Nobody's fault. Everything that goes wrong, let's blame him on Mr. Nobody. And I think here the idea is people like a scapegoat. People don't like to take responsibility for what they've done, and people like to find a scapegoat, somebody to blame for everything that might go wrong. Anyway, enough. If you enjoyed the video, give it a rating, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now. Mr. Nobody by Anonymous.